Hi, Germain.
Hey, Angel, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited today just for us to chat and just to hang out and spend some time today just talking about the mind and the way
Mhm.
that, we've kind of learned that it can really work for us or against us, right? In the different
Absolutely.
aspects of our life. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm excited when I first met you and we started talking about like your passion and kind of what you love to help people with in the whole person and
Mhm.
focusing on like how to help them be successful and also just have a good experience with overall the whole person, mind, body, soul, spirit, and you having your own personal journey of that and
Mhm.
that really leading you into realizing you love doing that. So share a
Yeah.
little bit about who you are and how that all kind of prompted for you, like your love for mind, body, soul, spirit, and realizing the whole person is important.
Yeah, well, it's been an evolution for me for sure. I've become now a holistic health educator and holistic health coach is what I do. I have a degree in health sciences and certification in integrative nutrition. So my life steered that way. And what I started understanding when working with people and doing the health education stuff was how important the mind was to everything. And when I first got into it, of course, you want people to eat well, you want people to exercise and all those things. But in college, I remember gravitating more towards the mental health aspects of it and understanding that mental health is a lot of times a driving force behind the behaviors that we do and whether they be good or bad. So once I put that in perspective, I started understanding in order to heal as a whole being, it's not just the foods we eat, it's also how we think and our perspective on everything, every circumstance, everything we encounter in life. How we perceive it is so important to our health.
Yeah, yeah. And you really are passionate about it. I remember when I first met you, that was such a draw for me because, I don't find a lot of people that get it, right? That just get it and
Mhm.
understand that that is so important and then have a desire to want to kind of get into the deeper places of that. And so we've had some really wonderful conversations about what that looks like. Talk a little bit about like in your own life how the mind was really kind of something that you realized it was you really wanted to learn more about, and then how did that help you in helping people?
Yeah, well, I guess it's have to start back when I was younger. I would say my teenage years, I developed panic disorder, and that was something that was I didn't quite understand, and the whole flight or flight response. People who have experienced anxiety or panic disorder will understand that there's your stress response system goes off, and for panic disorder, there's no trigger. It's just I could be talking to you and it just kind of goes off, and you go into this you're gonna die kind of feeling, and it's that intense fear that you feel. So that would start to happen when I was in high school, is when teenagers is when it started, and then not really understanding that. I always thought there was something wrong with me, countless times to the ER and all these things, and they would always tell me I'm fine. So once I started studying and understanding the mind and the neurochemical balance in the brain and how it's associated with everything from our experiences to even the foods we eat to the decisions we make in our lives to suffering we encounter. So many things can shift what's going our brain chemistry and have an effect on us in a negative way. So once I started to understand like all of that, I was able to kind of incorporate that into my whole being and start healing up. And then once I realized, once you live a bit more balanced life in all those areas, like I so wanted to help people to do that as well, especially those dealing with mental health issues that are difficult to tackle. And I was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety, panic disorder when I was younger. So my evolution through all that and healing up really, really helped me to understand it. And then as my studies went along, it was like, man, I want to go out and help people and be a positive force for good in that area if I could. So that's my mission right now, is to reach out to people, help them in their health, and to help them understand how important it is that we keep a proper perspective on life and be rooted in focusing on positive things, no matter the circumstances that we encounter.
Yeah, I think that was one of the hardest things for me was growing up. I was always really in my head, and I was also really in my feeling structure. So between the two of those, I was kind of sandwiched into torment. You know what I mean? It was like always feeling everybody and everything, not having language for that, feeling things really deeply and myself really deeply, and then my mind always looping in the fight or flight, and then also like I'm bad, I'm not good enough, worthless kind of thinking. And so it really impacted like who I drew to me, whether what my experiences were, and I was in a real victim mentality. My whole life was victim mentality. Well, I'll say from about 12 on. I found out I was adopted at 12. And so the person I had believed to be my dad wasn't my dad. And that really shifted me. 12 is such a gentle age, right? You're going into the whole hormonal shift and all of that. So it really did. But my mind was something that I realized it could make me or break me. Like it really could just devastate me in a thought, one thought, and I'd spiral down, right? Yeah. So, and my anxiety in my life looked different because my anxiety was like always running, but I never knew that it was anxiety. So, and I always was in a depressed state, thinking very negatively. I grew up in a very negative thinking environment. So not only was I modeled it, I, lived within it, but then I developed my own. And so anything I wanted to do or believed I could do, I would have myself talked out of it and be in complete defeat before I'd even get started. Right. That was one of my patterns. Yeah. So I love how, especially men, I think not enough men talk about mental health and their own personal journey and really get into the depth of what life is like for them. And one thing, I have 4 sons, and one thing that I realized is that they have a lot of the same issues that I've known women to have or girls to have. They just don't feel as free to share them. And so it's nice to hear you share what that has been like for you. Talk to me a little bit about what you've experienced in working with people. What's some of the overall patterns that you've noticed, whether, mental health, whether it be defeating thoughts or even just the mentality that they live from that you can see is really negatively impacting them? And then what are some of the ways that you kind of bring their attention to it so that they can even want to start changing that?
Yeah, absolutely. The people that I've been able to work with and kind of understand, a reoccurring theme has always been, people when they have a symptom or they have, health concerns and things like that, they'll go and seek help, whether from a doctor or a health coach or a nutritionist or what have you. But in my experience working with people, when we would sit down and analyze things holistically, then we would see that, a good question I always ask is when they're having health problems, okay, when did this start? And when you start to analyze that, there's a lot of things in there that are stress related, and the statistics will say that 3 out of 4 doctor visits are rooted in stress related ailments. So what they're finding is you may present with symptoms that may be, mental illness, it may be chronic illness, it may be any of those things. But if you look at it, stress, chronic stress and traumatic stress and all these things is a driving force behind it. So what the beauty of what my experience was, as we progressed through, our experience, we were able to analyze those things. So you're not only addressing what's going on with them as far as what they're feeling, you're identifying some triggers that, whether it be the state of mind and how they perceive things, or just experiences in their life that haven't fully reconciled. I think a lot of people I think many people are damaged in some way from some of the sufferings and some of the traumatic events that have occurred in their lives. And as we encounter these things, we don't always know how to respond to these things. And I know from my own experience, it's you're always going to encounter something where you don't know how to respond, and you have to work your way through that. And it gets tougher as you get older. So for me, being able to help people to see those things, because we can every nutritionist, dietitian, health coach, we can give a diet and tailor it to a particular person. But I think it's so important not to overlook the mental health aspects of what's driving either the behaviors or the illness itself that's manifesting in the body. And I think a lot of it is from the way stress has impacted our lives. So you talk about like the negative emotions, whether it be frustration, fear, anxiety, worry, all these things, they shift your body hormonally, and and in the brain too, it shifts some things that are they drive illness, inflammation, and all these things. So I just think it's such an important part of healing to understand that. And as I said, as we progress, for them to see that epiphany of, wow, like I didn't think about those things, like we just focus on what we're feeling in the moment and how I just want to feel well. But it's also beneficial to understand what kind of got me here and how can I change that. So it's been, I know in my life, I always tell people perspective and perception is so important. And I'm on this thing right now with perspective and trying to analyze different things. And I don't know if you know, but I'm a photographer as well. I love taking pictures. And, the cool thing about it is it just kind of hit me a little bit on anybody can pick up a camera and you can go and you can look through your viewfinder or your screen or what have you and focus on anything in your environment. And you choose what you focus on. And in that frame, you're able to even narrow your focus even more in that frame to focus on what you're focused on. And whatever it is that you're focused on is going to determine how you interpret that situation, that image. And it's the same in life. And we go through situations and we encounter different things in our life. And whatever the situation may be, we still have a choice as far as what to focus on through our experience. And what we're focused on will determine how we manifest our being through that experience. And it's so important that we make it. It's so easy. We go through difficult things, and it's so easy to let the circumstance overwhelm us. And I just think that keeping that perspective is so important, because it will mean the difference between allowing it to overwhelm you and allowing it to help develop and grow you and push you along through life. And I think that's critically important.
And I think talking about it and sharing awareness is so important, because a lot of people don't even have language for a lot of the things that they necessarily may need, or areas of like focus, and they may be overwhelmed by all the areas of focus that, they're experiencing all of these different areas in their life where their focus is drawn, right? So like lack of something, or like where they feel they're failing in something, or whatever that looks like, whether it be exercise or eating right, or even the way of like being conscious of their thoughts, being conscious of their stress level, and how am I feeling, and what's going on, what is my internal dialogue. And for me, that was why I am so passionate about like the work I do with people, is getting to the roots of why. Like, this is where we all complement one another, I believe, in what we do for people, right? It's like getting to the root of why. And what I realized for myself, because I eat healthy, I've been gluten, dairy, sugar-free, eat really clean for about 7 years now, and recently went through a very, very, completely wiped me out, where my adrenals, my hormones, my neurotransmitters, everything just went haywire. And I could not figure out what was going on. And I was so frustrated, because I have such a healthy, clean life, like everything, even my thoughts, and, what I surround myself in and what I focus. And I couldn't figure out. I was like just praying and praying, like, Lord, reveal this to me, because I was mad. I was mad. I mean, I got so sick that I couldn't take in food. I had to puree my food and drink my, drink. And I wasn't holding nutrition. And oh, I was so frustrated. And what he showed me was my conscious reality and then my unconscious reality were very different. My unconscious reality was still getting looped in where it would physically within my body cause my stress is held mainly in my stomach. That's the main source, is my stomach. And so when it's like I can be asleep, and I experience this a lot, I could be totally asleep and believing that I'm relaxed, but my unconscious reality has my mind and my body in this completely different state. So even though I'm doing all these things to really be intentional about not allowing stress to be a factor, or chemicals, or awful food and all of that, my unconscious reality and what that was doing had me in like I was living two lives, right? Like two completely different lives. And so as I started to see the role my mind was playing, and in the way that the roots of my life's experience, where I have been damaged from choices that other people made, things like that, and those deep rooted fears that don't need to be triggered in order to be just present, I really had to get into a different place where, whether it was through the window of my body to my mind, or whether it was through my feeling structure, the emotional part, whatever that was, spirit, soul, I had to figure out what is driving my unconscious reality, and how can I get that reality into a peaceful state, a restful state. And that's when I just became intrigued with the mind, because I started realizing that it's so layered that we could be focusing on, like, there's nothing that annoys me more than people who say, just do positive thinking. It annoys me because it's like a band-aid, right? It's like putting a band-aid over a cut. Well, the reason why you're not thinking positive is because there's a root to that. There's a reason to that. And unless you deal with the reason, you could positive think your way all the way, through your whole life and never believe it. It never be true for you. It never change that unconscious reality and bring you into a place of rest, or cause you to have a positive outcome, right? Results, and feeling like you have accomplished something. And even if you set goals, whether it be in food or exercise, or just even like the mental state, right? Of I'm going to focus on what I am doing well, and I'm going to focus on where my life is improving. You can do all those things, but if you're trying to convince yourself of a truth that is not your own, and then bring the more truth and more positivity in that, then you're just like covering up, you know what I mean? You're kind of brushing that under the carpet. You're not dealing with it. So for me, it was this, I want to know what my mind is perceiving, believing, looping on, replaying, all of that, so that I can bring my unconscious reality into a place of truth as well. And so that's when I started just realizing, like, I think there's kind of like these tiers of dealing with your mind and supporting your mind and getting into that deeper place. One is very kind of surface level, where it's like, okay, this is what I'm focusing on. This is what I want to do. It's very intentional, right? My goals are to eat better, whatever that looks like for me, without creating overwhelm. I want to really clean up my life, right? Make better choices, make better decisions. And then there's what the complement to that in, okay, and then I want to acknowledge what my truths have been, so that I can exchange those for the truth, God's truth for me, his plans, his will, his agenda, his intentions, so that I can bring these two realities and them be one, right? And so the mind really does either keep you from that, or can really support you in then embracing and engaging our soul, spirit, heart, and will, so that all of us in our created being, all of our parts, can then be moving in one direction instead of them all over the place, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, like, what's your experience of people in their lack of understanding of in our being that we have a mind, body, soul, spirit? You know what I mean? What is that been common for you with
It
people?
has to, yeah, it has to a degree. I think it's it's fascinating when you think about how we're not just conscious mind, functioning mind. We are, there's levels, as you say, to us, and the subconscious, I think, is super important because that's where a lot of things manifest that we manifest out into our bodies, things that in our past that we haven't really dealt with, and those kind of things. And connecting those two is so important. And to your point of, we have to be aware of what we're focused on. So whether it's, we want to make a change in our diet, we want to do these things, there's always going to be challenges and obstacles to those things. Our brains are wired with patterns, habitual things. It's literally in our brains, there's just patterns that form. It's hard to change that. You have to delete those files and reprogram that brain.
Yeah.
And there's an intersection between the mind and spirit, and all that intersects in your conscious mind. So being able to navigate through all that, it's important. I like how people sometimes will say, what you focus on, you give power to. And it's so important to be mindful because thoughts are going to come. You have thoughts every day about different things. And when you encounter it, it's usually when, we all know for the most part how to respond when life is going well. It's typically the most challenging when we encounter things that are very difficult and for us to go through. And in those moments, very important, we still have a choice what we choose to focus on. And, we give power to that. So thoughts are going to come to your mind, but you have to let them visit that are not of spiritual, what God says. So you have to be mindful of what those things are that are not of God and let them pass because they're going to come. But choose to focus on the truth, is what God said about your circumstance, about whatever it is you're going through, and about how you're going to get through what you're going through. And I've seen that not only with people I've encountered, but also in my own life. As you know, my dad passed not that too long ago. Probably is no doubt the most difficult thing I've ever had to experience. And see all those things you learn when life is going good about God, about how everything, how great He is. Well, that is the time where you get put to the test. All those things you were shouting about on the mountain, now you're in the valley, and you have to keep focused on that as you're going through that. And so many things go through your mind, so many things that you get attacked in a lot of different levels. And it's super important to stay on the truth of what God says. And that's the way you're going to get through a lot of those things. So I know those people who can relate to what that situation is. And it's very difficult, but it's a fight, and you have to be mindful of where your brain and your mind is focused on, and allowing this, like you say, the spirit has to have that lead, that influence on how the mind is functioning. And we have to stay that way because it's so easy to slip into, a feeling of overwhelming, and your mind just begins to focus on the circumstance that's difficult that you're going through. Lots of biblical examples of this that happened, and so many talk about the mind. That's why I love the beauty of the lessons that the Bible teaches. And it's like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's so important how the mind is. And, and he would, I think it was Paul who would talk about what to focus on, what is good, what is lovely, what all these things that are good, think on these things. And it's like, that's empowering you, and that's focusing on the truth, and that's feeding you. And in the world we live in right now, with so many distractions that are negative, and are not conducive to our well-being and becoming the best version of ourselves, it's harder now to stay focused on truth and stay focused on what's real and stay focused on what's going to help you and be conducive to you becoming the best version of yourself. And I think it has to be rooted in an anchor, a spiritual anchor, and what God says is true. And, I think, a lot of people will go through life and they will find themselves in they no doubt will find themselves in a circumstance where there's a lot of things going to be going through their mind. And through that, you have to have an anchor to navigate you through what is true, no matter what your eyes see, no matter what's in your environment and circumstance. So it's super important. And like I said, I've seen that in people when I try to encourage them in that way, and then I experience it in my own life, and I got to fight just as hard to get through those things and ultimately let it transform me into a force for good and to help people to understand it as well.
Yeah. And really, the Lord's always trying to develop us. And that's what I loved about this last, I've got, as we go through so many phases of development and growth, right? And some are harder than others. This one probably was harder for me because I'm already doing so many things and healthy. But it just goes to show you, you can never take for granted, right? Like, not only where we are, but how far we still have to go as human beings and as children, like learning how God, I mean, we're always going to be learning, but it was like, I remember I would engage like scenarios in my mind. And I even had to get to the point where I was like, because I felt like was losing my mind. That's the thing when your neurotransmitters and mine were extreme. So it was like one was high, one was low, and they're supposed to be balanced. And the naturopath, well, I have several people in my life. And so one of the naturopaths I went to, he's like, it's a miracle you're standing. You know what I mean? Like when I had my labs done. And, I'm so thankful that in our community, we have people that, like, I don't know what I would do without Camille. You know what I mean? And like Gina Beckman, who's been a counselor for over 25 years and knows about humanity and knows about the mind. And Camille too, it's like she knows about neurotransmitters and hormones and all that stuff. So I had very fortunate to have people guiding me. But I would lean into the Lord and I would say, Lord, I don't understand. Like, I do so much. I'm so intentional about where I allow my mind to go and where I don't. Like, help me with this, right? And I would engage where my mind would go with the Lord. And he would just show me how all of the experiences in our life, not to mention kind of like our patterns, like you said, patterns and behaviors, all of those things, the habits. My mind has had such a habit in going into the worst case scenario that really plays in the unconscious. And so it's like always, kind of seeing what could happen, the potential of something. And so I really had to draw intentionally my unconscious mind, my spirit, my soul, all of me to this place to say, what is my reality right now? I'm laying in my bed, I'm in a home. It's like I had to literally get in that tangible place of putting right in front of me what was true in that moment. Because what I realized, I've known this, but I realize it in a different way. That is the first thing that the enemy will try to take out for us is our mind. Because without that, I mean, it can change everything for us, right? And so I got into this place of my authority in saying, if I have to focus moment by moment through my day, where I just continue to allow my mind to, so like if my mind would start focusing on, well, you're not eating and you're, you like almost fainting. And I went in the ambulance to the hospital. And then of course, well, they don't know what's wrong with me and you're fine. And you're not, right? And the mind goes, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Right. And it's like, okay, that's one reality. And that was a truth if I would have continued on that way. But I had to lean into God's truth there and say, okay, Lord, I know we're going to find a way here. We're going to find a way for me to be okay. But it was like, just like you said, how Paul said, focus on this, focus on that. It's like the Lord just said, put the light in the place of, okay, let your mind go here and stay there. And some days it took everything I had to do just that. But it was like developing my mind to be in a place of receiving that new reality and then exchanging the old reality. And like I said, I am very healthy. I'm a very healthy person. So to go from one extreme to the other, it was like I was manifesting, I was creating, my mind was creating the reality from, all of these different things. But then I had a very physical, the neurotransmitters being out of whack, I had a very physical component too. So I had a spiritual component and I had a physical component. And as you know, they all impact the other, the state of my soul, the state of my spirit, my heart, my mind, my will, all of that. So I had to just bring all my parts into these places of truth day by day until my stress level calmed enough where I could take in food and then slowly start to strengthen again. And I think what's people underestimate the mind. They
Mhm.
underestimate the importance of, number one, not taking it for granted. Number two, not getting um uh what do I want to say, careless on what am I thinking, what are the thoughts I'm having, what am I focusing on, what am I, like you said, what am I giving power to, what am I
Mhm.
allowing to override. And we're laxed, we're too laxed there, and then until something's really wrong, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think I think that's really a good important point in that there is things that are going to happen in your life, and what you're focused on during those times are important because you're gonna experience things that are gonna bring elements to your mind that are not true, and it's understanding the reality of things that although what you see is the reality of what it is, you still have the power and the choice to focus on what is truth and to transcend that. I think a lot of people, just in the spiritual sense, we're going to go through difficult things and we're going to have some choices to make. The circumstances will not change. It's gonna be your mind that changes to that circumstance. And the more
Yes.
we accept that, that hey, these things are a part of life. There's some things in life that are unavoidable. And like I said, there's happiness that comes upon us, and there's a lot of good positive experiences we have. But you're not going to get through this life without experiencing some negative things and some suffering along the way. And you have to be prepared to understand how to handle those things and where the mind is focused, as you were saying, because if you don't, then I see so many people that are not, I like to say mental posture. You're not in a
Yes.
position to be able to handle certain things. And we have to change how our brains are set up to experience these things for the benefit not only of ourselves, because it's going to make us the best version of ourselves. But when we become the best version of ourselves, then we're able to give to others at the best we can. And that to me is why it's so important to understand how to navigate through these things, because if you don't become everything you were created to be,
Yes.
and you miss out on the opportunities to help those people around you. And we have our reasons to be, we have things we go through that are going to be difficult, and we have our reasons to be bitter, resentful, and, it's understandable some of the things that people go through, but it's still a choice. And you're
Yes.
gonna you're gonna go through these things and you're gonna feel it anyway, but you might as well, transcend that and make it something that's gonna incorporate into your being for good, for a positive
Yeah.
outcome to where you can be a benefit to other people. That's better than just being upset, bitter, resentful about the things that maybe have been out of your control, and then some of the things that are a consequence of the decisions that we make that only exacerbate some of the sufferings we no doubt will encounter in life. So I think all of that is understanding the levels of that as far as your mind and your subconscious and the spiritual aspect of soul, mind, body, spirit, all that,
Yeah.
and make it in harmony. It's never going to be a point where we get to where we got this thing down. We're always going to encounter things that it's like, riding a bike. You keep balance, you got to keep moving. It's not something that's going to be just you reach a point of stasis. It's never that. It's
Mhm.
always going to be ebbs and flows, ups and downs. So you have to have a strong mental posture and have to be rooted spiritually in who you are in God to be able to go through these things. And it doesn't mean you're not going to feel the pain, not going to feel the suffering through difficult things, but
Right.
it means you're going to use that to transcend whatever it is you're going through and help people that are around you.
And you always do come out stronger, and that's the one thing. It's like when I was going through this, I was telling the people that I love, I was like, I know this is not for nothing, right? Like, God's not creating the suffering, but I also know that he's here with me and he's going to help me be stronger, use this all for good. And that's exactly what happened. And every single time we go through something, the way we're able to help someone else is just different, deeper, right? And the way God flows through us and the way he helps them through us, it just expands. And it's funny because like when I was everything I've gone through in the last 7 years, I love what you say. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. It does boil down to them making the choice. Because 7 years ago, when I got sick, and I was at that crossroads, I had a choice and I could have chose two different roads, right? Two different scenarios. But along the way, throughout the 7 years, it has been a progression of choices. And it isn't until I decide within myself that I'm going to either align with God's will, or I'm going to, in some way, shape, or form, choose. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm not going to lean into that. I'm not going to believe that. And once that choice is made, that is when your soul, spirit, body, heart, mind, and will come together in alignment with God and who we were created to be, and then can move us forward with Him and say, okay, I can move on to the next thing. The Lord kind of showed something when we were talking about thoughts that I just wanted to mention. It's interesting because I like to break down thoughts like this. It's like when you say focus, and that's the thing, focus and truth. Those two things, if you unpack the thought to give you the insight to what am I focusing on and what is the truth, not my truth in the reality either that I've manifested or that I'm fearing or that I'm believing, but what is the truth? And if you allow focus and truth to come together, it will drive the thoughts, right? And so you're not having to try and force feed positive thoughts or mantras. I love the concept of mantras, but I don't love the teaching of how to implement mantras. You know what I mean? And for me, mantra is repeating, speaking life to the truth, God's truth for you, and also honoring the truth in. So for example, like if I'm in a situation and I'm experiencing something, that is my truth. That's not the truth, but that is my truth in that moment. And if I don't acknowledge it or honor it, I won't be able to move on to the truth. And so if I sit there and try to convince myself of something different in that reality, my soul is going to rebel and be like, and my will, and then I'll be fighting against myself. But I acknowledge my truth is that this is my reality, but I'm going to speak life into this place to say, Lord, I want your truth to come in here. And our focus and the truth can align. Then we can move into where our mind will support us. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think although these things are, when we talk about them, when we break them down like that and we analyze them, they seem so complex. But and it is to a large degree. But what I think is the way we can simplify it is to stay focused on the truth of what God said. And He gives us that in His Word. And to me, that's the anchor I talk about when it's like you go through something. The truth is the truth from the beginning to the end. There's no change in that. So no matter what the circumstance may tell you against that truth, that's where faith comes in. And you have to be able to hold on to that truth despite of what the world tells you. And because that's ultimate truth. And understanding that on the levels is so important. And to me, when you don't know how to do that and you don't know, how to get through something, just go back to what the Word says and what the truth is. When you go through difficult things, He's with us. And no matter what the circumstance tells you, that's the truth. He's with you. And stay focused on those things, no matter what you encounter. And it'll help you to kind of understand a little bit more. And you get through something and you're like, I get it now. And then another thing will come. And then you use the experience you had and what He did before, what God did before. And now it's like you're prepared. You accept what difficulty you're about to encounter. And it's going to be tough, but you know that He's with you. And to me, He teaches you so much along that way. And it can truly bring healing when you voluntarily accept that things are going to come, but you're strong enough to get through it. And I always tell people, I believe, I always tell people, never let your mind forget what your spirit already knows, that you're going to get through them. And a lot of times we end up with our minds just so many things, distractions, and so many thoughts enter our mind and attacks on our mind And it's like you said, it's a battle for the mind is what it is. And we have to stay in the truth and no matter what we experience. And that's how we're going to grow and develop and become everything we're created to be. If we don't become everything we were created to be, the world is a lesser place.
Absolutely.
And to me, we all have that responsibility, and we all have our trials. Some people have it harder than others, but yet, if they have it harder than others, they have the power still to transcend those things, although they may not see it. Their mind may not understand that. But the truth is, that's the truth. They can, and that's what I hope to encourage and help people to understand. I have my own experiences, and others have theirs. But no matter what God, allows you to go through, He allowed it because you're strong enough. Even if your mind may forget that, your spirit knows. That's why there's something inside you that kind of that keeps pushing you along. And if we connect those things and we're empowered, then we're able to get through a lot of things that you probably think you couldn't.
And even if you don't appear, believe, or seem to be strong enough in one way, He'll develop you in being strong enough through it, right? So it's like, in the state you begin with, you may not be strong enough because you're not as developed, but once you move through it, the development of going through that and the growth, then you will be stronger for it. And it's funny because the things that we're talking about to some people may seem hard because no one talks about it. No one teaches us how. No one gets into the language of our created nature so that we can start understanding and having a framework for what's my being, body, soul, spirit, heart, mind, and will, created being. What is that, right? And that's why I love talking about these things. And if people would allow themselves to understand, my mind doesn't need to grasp it, just like you said, what your spirit knows to be true. God created us to have other parts that will help us understand, especially through the Holy Spirit. And just in every way that He created us to have that higher knowing, you know what I mean? That deeper knowing. And so if people would allow themselves to not let the mind say, oh, I don't get it, and then shut down, but to say, I'm open. I'm open to God's truth for me. I'm open to what He wants to teach me and He wants to, develop me in. And so that's the thing, is that, some people, it is really simple. It is absolutely simple when they're wanting to dismantle defeating thoughts and they're aware that they're very negative and very, even where it's something where judgmental, condescending of themselves, right? Like, and the state that that's putting them in. If they're just willing to acknowledge, you know what, I think I've allowed my mind to completely shut me down, really create a life that is not bringing me joy, and really just even starting to acknowledge I want to do something about that. That in itself allows for them to, like when you were saying earlier, it's speaking God's truth. And so, and also speaking what they know to be true. So for example, when I was talking about unpacking the thoughts and asking, what am I focusing on? And then what is the truth? The truth, when you're kind of acknowledging, okay, well, you know what? I'm really insecure. You know what I mean? Like if someone says the truth is that I'm really insecure, God's truth for me is that He did not create me to be insecure. He created me to have such a place of being anchored and rooted in love and in knowing that I am worthy, right? And so they don't have to necessarily believe it yet. But if they're open to it and make space for it, and then they acknowledge where they're at, that in itself gives them the opportunity to make the choice to allow a different reality. And so it's really that simple as acknowledging those things, and even acknowledging, wow, I'm really jealous. I'm really, I feel like everybody has more than I do. Whatever they are allowing themselves to acknowledge their thoughts are focused on, then they can start to kind of unpack their state of being in bitterness or in resentment or wherever it is that they're living from, that they don't necessarily is where they're manifesting from, right? So it's really, and it's all already, like you said, our spirit already knows where we are and where we're not. So if we just
Mhm.
allow ourselves to kind of step out of what we're believing it needs to look like and start allowing our parts to reveal and express and share, why am I upset today? Why am I agitated today? Why am I angry? Why am I frustrated? And even learning the language for, this is what I can do when I'm really, in a negative, bitter state, or really in a sad, depressed, anxious state, then we do help ourselves in being the potential of being who we are in our created being, just meeting that potential, right? We're supporting that process. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. And I think an important point to that, all that you said, it's, I want people to understand as I talk with them, when I encounter people, it's like, to understand that way we're thinking is how the mind works as spirit, but the impact that thinking has on your physical body is so beneficial. And then opposite to that, the negative thoughts have such a negative impact on the body. And that was to my point of when people come to you because they're presenting with some issues, a lot of times the way they're thinking is contributing or at least
Yes.
exacerbating whatever it is that they're dealing with. And I think to start there, if you have a healthy mind, you have a healthy body. And to me, to start there is a good starting point for anybody that may have health issues, is to identify some issues in the mind and the connection between spirit and all of that. And that can be at least in the least bit to just help the body heal, but a lot of times it's actual cause of some things. So I
Yeah.
think it's so important to understand that, like, when people come to you and they want a better diet, they want a better, exercise more, which is all good things. But in understanding what you just laid out is so important for people, to total holistic healing, their whole
Yeah.
being. And that's so important. And like you say, I think a lot of people are distracted by a lot of things. To identify that takes self-reflection. It takes a journey inward. We're so focused on everything in the outer world, and it's like we don't take the time to give the attention to the person that needs it the most, which is ourselves. And we're so focused on everything else in our life and our environment. And I think I don't think most people dedicate enough time for themselves to take that journey. And it's amazing when you really ask yourself certain things, you will get an answer. And it's
Yeah.
connecting all those things because your spirit is trying to communicate to you, and the conscious mind is distracted by a lot of different things. But when you voluntarily make an effort to connect, it will connect what God designed us, and
Yeah.
God speaks to us in spirit. And I think there's a harmony that's there that will bring ultimate healing. And that's why I love what you do, because you help people to understand that, and you help people to bring peace to their whole being by doing that, because you take people a place where they don't always either know or try to go. And we have to go there if we're going to be fully healed and fully healthy in our mind, body, spirit, soul.
Yeah. And I think, one of the ways that we get so distracted in our mind is believing that that person is why we're experiencing something, or this person is the cause of something. And like you said, we are so outwardly focused, not just in the negativity in the world, but also in giving our power away to believe that everyone has so much power over our life to determine the outcome. And it's just absolutely not true. In every relationship, in every situation or circumstance, it's like, okay, wait a minute, whether that person forgives me or not, or agrees with me or not, I can then change what this dialogue and dynamic is for me internally, and I can shift into a place of freedom so that I can continue to grow and expand, whether they do or not, or they allow it or not. And so many people, I know for me, I was so bitter because I blamed everybody for everything, and I could justify all day long why it was their fault and not my own. And it wasn't until I started saying, what's the common denominator in this life that is so, I was so unhappy. And it all, when I started changing what myself and what my perspective was and what my focus was on and all of that, my eating, my whole life, my whole life changed. Everything in my life changed. And so that is, I just think that's so important when we take back ownership over the power that we have in our own life. And the other thing too is like for me, when I started out, I didn't have all this awareness then. If you would have had
Mhm.
this conversation with me then, I would absolutely have missed most of what we're talking about. But we don't
Yeah.
have to put that kind of pressure on ourselves to have that level of understanding right away. I came into it with one choice, that number one, I didn't want to be on a bunch of medications. I didn't want to have any more unnecessary surgeries, and that I wanted to get better. And so for me, I started just with food. I started just with food. And it was in that I started to think more clearly and I started to
Mhm.
feel more deeply. And my body wasn't full of all the processed junk and
Mhm.
all of those numbing, I was numb and I was
Mhm.
disconnected and I was just tuned out. And so as I rid myself and my life of those things, my senses, everything started to come to life. And then I had the capacity and the desire to want to go further. So if we meet ourselves where we're at without putting expectations that are overwhelming and shut us down before we even begin and say, I just want to focus on, what are my thoughts? Or I just want to focus on maybe eating a little cleaner or walking each day.
Mhm.
Whatever that looks like, it's a perfect start. Right. And so
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be, we all don't have to be on the same level. We all just want to
Mhm.
support each other in getting closer
Yeah.
to God's truth for us, it doesn't even matter what people's beliefs are and what their
Mhm.
religious background is. That is even irrelevant to allowing yourselves to come into the true nature of who God created us to be, because it's a journey, right?
Mhm.
And so I just want for those people who are watching and thinking, well, like I've got, I don't have that level of depth, or I don't see things this way, or think that's totally fine. Because if they would have seen me 7 years ago, I was a completely different person. They would not even recognize me today. But it was the
Yeah.
progression of my journey that allowed the Lord to really give me depth and for me to want it, right? And so it
Yeah.
looks different for every person, and not one is wrong and not one is better than the other. It's just different for
Yeah.
everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I love talking to you so much. Is there anything you want to share before we close out, just that you feel is important for kind of what you learned in your life and how you can offer to other people that are maybe discouraged and maybe feel like they're never going to get better or feel better? Something you want to maybe share?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think my ultimate mission in my life now, everything that I've experienced, is to empower people to become all they were created to be, knowing that there are going to be circumstances that come into your life that can deter that from happening. So what I try to my message to people as I encounter them in my life now is, no matter what you're going through, because people, like I said, I've come to understand that the world is a difficult place and there's no avoiding that. So, but if we don't successfully get through the things, the challenges in our life, no matter the degree of it, then we won't become all we're created to be. And when we don't do that, it's just the so much that's missing. If you don't become everything you're created to be, there's a void in the world, and people need you. So we have to take care of ourselves in our mind, body, and spirit, and we have to transcend our suffering, and we have to become all we were created to be, to make an impact. Because I believe everybody came to this earth with something to give that the world needs, and only you can give it. And if we succumb to the things that happen in our lives they're very difficult and seemingly overwhelming, we would never manifest that. And so my message to people is you can get through whatever you're going through, and to stay with it and stay in truth, and knowing that no matter what you experience, just keep moving forward. God's right there with you. And you're going to transcend it, and you're going to help so many people, the people that you were created to help. And to me, that provides purpose, that provides meaning in life, and that's enough to sustain you through whatever suffering you encounter in your life.
Absolutely. And I think, establishing identity through that, establishing value through that, and being affirmed in who you are as you're going through all of that is one of the greatest rewards, to experience love in a way that you've never known, and allowing yourself to feel loved by yourself and also by God, to say, you know what? Okay, I want to make better decisions. I want to make better choices. And, I love when you say we have to do this, because here's the thing: we do or we don't. So we either choose it or we don't. And for us that know that we want better, it is a have to. We do have to, because we know in order to get to that place, that's the choices we need to make. So on the other end of it, it's or don't, and continue suffering, right? And
Mhm.
it's, for me, it was like, what do I have to lose? If that seems so hard, I'm already suffering. So I'm either going to suffer trying, or I'm going to suffer and be stagnant and completely not progressing. And that wasn't a choice for me, right? Like that decision was already made, because my spirit was like, all right, soul, get on board, because I'm not leaving you behind there. And thank God for that, right? Thank God for our parts. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank God.
So I'm really grateful that you just were able to spend this time with me in this chat, talking about this. And I think the more people hear, God's truth and the language, and really pushing us in that way, I think it's just gonna, like you said, we're a better place when everybody, our community of God's children, right? The church, our community, we are the body of Christ. And it's, if we allow ourselves to be the best of who we are in God's creation of us, this world will be different, right? And so it's just
Absolutely.
being responsible and accountable for our own role in that, instead of spending all of our energy and focus on what other people are or are not doing. That would even make a significant change. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Eh,
And how can people get a hold of you if they are interested in your services? Can you share that?
Yeah, well, I have a Facebook page, my Facebook page and my Instagram page. I'm just starting a business page that I'm going to get going, but Germain Galvez on Facebook or Instagram is where people can find me and follow me. And then I'm launching new phases of my business to help people. That's coming up, but that's how they can follow me at this time. It's my personal pages on Facebook and on Instagram, Germain Galvez.
And that's Germain. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I want to
Germain.
tell you, your photos are amazing. I mean, they're just breathtaking. So I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
them as well. Yeah. So I'm going
Thank
to
you.
stop our recording.